You hadn't expected a simple hike in the woods to turn into something straight out of a horror movie. It was supposed to be a normal day, just you and Bakugo, taking on one of the more remote trails outside the city. He'd been in a rare good mood earlier, and though you'd teased him about it, the truth was, you were glad to spend time with him away from the chaos of UA and hero work. But now, as the sun dipped lower and the shadows stretched long across the forest floor, something felt wrong. "Did you hear that?" you asked, stopping in your tracks, your heart hammering in your chest. The sound had been faint, barely there, a rustling in the underbrush that didn't quite sound like wind or an animal. It was too deliberate. Too close. Bakugo scoffed, but you notice his shoulders tense slightly. "It's probably just a squirrel or something. Don't start freaking out on me." You shot him a look, but his words didn't ease the tightness in your chest. The forest, once calm and peaceful, seemed to have shifted into something darker, something that made your skin crawl. "I'm not freaking out," you muttered, stepping closer to him as you both continued down the trail. "It's just, I don't know. Something feels off." Bakugo snorted, his usual confident swagger still intact, though his eyes scanned the woods with a little more focus than before. "You're being paranoid. It's a forest. It's supposed to be creepy." You tried to brush off the unease gnawing at you, but as the minutes passed, that feeling of being watched, of something lurking just out of sight, only grew stronger. The trees around you seemed to close in, their shadows dark and twisted, and every snap of a twig made your heart jump into your throat. "Seriously, though," you said after a while, your voice low. "What if something's out there?" Bakugo huffed, turning to you with an exasperated look. "And what exactly is going to be out here? A villain hiding in the middle of nowhere?" He was trying to stay cool, but you knew Bakugo well enough by now to catch the subtle signs. His jaw was clenched a little too tight, and he kept glancing over his shoulder, like he wasn't as sure of himself as he pretended to be. Before you could respond, a loud crack echoed through the forest, and the two of you froze. This time, the sound wasn't something small or distant. It was close, unnervingly close. And it sounded like something large had snapped a branch in half just a few feet away from you. Your breath caught in your throat as you turned, eyes wide, trying to pinpoint where the noise had come from. But there was nothing. Just the endless, darkening forest, the shadows playing tricks on your mind. "Okay," you said, your voice a little more shaky now. "Tell me that wasn't weird." Bakugo stayed quiet for a moment longer than you expected, his gaze fixed on the trees surrounding you. His fists were clenched, and you could see the faintest spark of his quirk crackling at his fingertips. A sure sign that he wasn't as calm as he wanted to be. "It's nothing," he muttered, though the edge in his voice betrayed him. "Let's just keep moving." You nodded, but the eerie feeling of being watched refused to leave. The two of you pressed on, walking faster now, though neither of you wanted to admit you were speeding up out of fear. Every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves felt like a threat, and the darkening sky above only made everything worse. After what felt like an eternity, you came to a clearing. The last bit of daylight barely illuminating the space around you. You stopped, hands on your knees, trying to catch your breath, and glanced at Bakugo. He was on high alert, his gaze darting around the clearing, searching for anything out of the ordinary. We're fine, right? You asked, hoping to hear some of that usual Bakugo bravado, something to calm your nerves. But he didn't answer right away. Instead, his eyes narrowed, and he stepped closer to you, his voice low and serious. Stay close. That was all you needed to hear, to know that he was just as unnerved as you were. For Bakugo to actually admit something might be wrong meant things had officially crossed into bad territory. Suddenly, another loud crack tore through the air, this time accompanied by a low, rumbling growl. Your heart slammed in your chest as the hairs on the back of your neck stood on end. You instinctively moved closer to Bakugo, your hand brushing against his arm. He glanced at you briefly, his expression still set in that stubborn, determined scowl, but his eyes softened for just a moment. We'll be fine, he said, his voice steady. Whatever's out here, I'll handle it. You weren't sure if his words were meant to reassure you or himself, but either way, the tension between you shifted. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was something else. Something that had been simmering beneath the surface for a while now. In this moment, where it felt like the forest was closing in on you, that something became impossible to ignore. You're not invincible, you know, you muttered, trying to keep your voice light despite the pounding in your chest. Bakugo gave you a sidelong glance, his lips twitching into something that was almost a smirk. I'm not, huh? You rolled your eyes, though the warmth of his presence next to you made you feel a little braver. Well, if we die out here, at least I can say I died next to the almighty King Explosion Murderer. He let out a low, humorless laugh, shaking his head. You're an idiot. Before you could shoot back a retort, the sound of rustling in the trees nearby made both of you tense. Bakugo moved in front of you, his body instinctively shielding yours as his hands sparked with energy, ready to blast whatever was out there. You stood frozen, holding your breath, waiting for whatever was hiding in the shadows to reveal itself. But then, nothing. Just silence. Bakugo didn't lower his hands right away, but he glanced back at you, his brows furrowed. Still think we're being watched? You hesitated, scanning the woods one last time, the eerie quiet sending chills down your spine. But nothing moved. Whatever was following you, whatever had been stalking through the woods, seemed to be gone now. You took a shaky breath, relief slowly washing over you. I don't know. Maybe it was just the wind or something. Bakugo huffed, though you could tell the tension in his shoulders hadn't left completely. Whatever it was, it's gone now. The two of you stood there for a moment, the adrenaline slowly ebbing away, replaced by a strange, shared silence. You hadn't realized just how close you were standing to him until now, your shoulder brushing against his. He didn't pull away, and for once, neither did you. Thanks, you said quietly, the weight of the night starting to catch up with you. For, not letting me freak out back there. He shrugged, the familiar cockiness creeping back into his voice. You'd have been fine without me. You smiled, sensing there was a warmth in his tone that wasn't usually there. Bakugo wasn't one for grand gestures, but in his own way, he was saying something more, something that made your chest tighten and your heart race for a whole different reason. Well, I'm glad you were here anyway. He didn't respond, but you caught the faintest hint of a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. The night still hung heavy around you. The forest still felt a little too dark, but standing there with Bakugo, the fear seemed a little less overwhelming. Maybe it was the way he stood close to you, or the way his usual tough exterior had softened just enough to let you in. Whatever it was, in that moment, it wasn't just the lingering fear of the woods that made your heart race. It was him.